Thank you, Paige. It's nice to see so many people here. Very nice. All right. Welcome. The Museum of Fine Arts was one of the first museums in the country to establish a fine art photography collection in 1924, 100 years ago. Alfred Stieglitz gave our museum 27 of his photographs. Here you see two of them. The image on the right was taken in 1907. It is called the Steerage, and it long associated with the early 20th century rise of immigration to our country. It, in fact, depicts people waiting for passengers to embark onto a ship to go back to Europe. I think you can see that it is an image in which shapes and patterns dominate. And as such, it has become known as an early herald of modernism. In the image on the left, you can see the hands of the photographer's wife, Georgia O'Keeffe. Stieglitz took many photographs of O'Keeffe from the late 1910s to the 1930s, in which he explored aspects of her physiognomy and personality, which he called a portrait in time. He believed that a portrait of someone does not always have to be of their face, but could be of another part of their body. Stieglitz, the central figure in American photography in the early 20th century, had been a crusader for the acceptance of the medium as fine art. Being from New York, he had tried for some years to persuade the Met in New York City, to take a group of his works as a gift, to no avail. His chance came when he met the MFA's curator of Indian art, Ananda Coomaraswamy, who was an amateur photographer and who was interested. Coomaraswamy persuaded the MFA's trustees to let him start a photography collection with this gift. This landmark acquisition made our museum one of the first American museums to accept photographs as fine art, and placed our institution at the forefront of photography collecting in America. In celebration of this auspicious moment in our history, my senior curator colleagues, Karen Haas, Kristen Gresh, and I, decided to write a new book about our collection. Realizing that photographs have from the beginning been made for a variety of purposes and play a variety of roles in our culture, we opted to focus the text of the book on the myriad ways that the medium has enriched our understanding of the world around us. The themes we chose to explore are listed on the slide: in the service of art, documenting scientific discovery, expeditions and surveys, the built environment, composing portraits, shaping identity, fame and fashion, conflicts and crises, social documents, social change, immortalizing resistance. The book will come out in November. I do have an advance copy if anyone wants to take a quick browse through it after the talk. This series of lectures will focus on these themes by means of the photographs that the MFA has collected over the years. My talk today will discuss the sections that I wrote about: how photographs benefited the fields of art and design, science, and fashion and celebrity. When the earliest inventors of photography began to experiment with the fixing of images by means of light and chemistry, their discoveries caused immediate excitement. In 1839, when the news of two different types of photo processes was presented publicly, the daguerreotype process by Louis-Jacques Mandé Daguerre in France, and the photogenic drawings of William Henry Fox Talbot in England, both were greeted with tremendous excitement. Immediately, the potential uses of the medium seemed so great that it was nearly unfathomable to see what this medium would turn out to be useful for. As William Henry Fox Talbot wrote, "I do not profess to have perfected an art, but to have commenced one, the limits of which it is not possible at present exactly to ascertain." Talbot's contemporaries from the fields of art, science, industry, and commerce welcomed photography as a new means for the dissemination of information. Early on, Talbot realized that he could attain a remarkable degree of accuracy of detail in his images. And when he made views of glassware in China, such as the one you see on the left, he marketed them as a means to inventory prized possessions. Next to this image, which he published in his groundbreaking 1844 book called The Pencil of Nature, he noted, should a thief afterward purloin the treasures, if the mute testimony of the picture were to be produced against him in court, it would certainly be evidence of a novel kind. Before long, a thriving and diverse community of photographers developed in major cities, many of them supporting the art and design industries. Louis-Remy Robert, whose work you see on the right, who worked at the Sèvres porcelain manufactory outside of Paris, used the camera to enhance his company's commercial opportunities. When examples of the porcelain's atelier's most elaborate pieces were chosen for presentation at the historic 1855 Exposition Universelle, Robert made photographs, such as this one, to display alongside them. In these photographs, he included small measuring guides, you can see it at the left, to indicate scale. These promotional images were not just advertisements, but Robert labeled them as art reproductions for sale, so he also hoped to sell them. Sketching from the nude was central to the practice of academically trained artists. Julien Vallou de Valneuve, whose work you see on the left, and who was originally a painter and lithographer, started specializing in nude photographs in the early 1850s. Because photographic portrayals of unclothed women were acceptable only when they were based on artistic tradition, in other words, resembling antique sculpture or old master paintings, Vallou de Villeneuve promoted these photographs as studies meant for the use of artists. His photographs were appreciated for their poetic sensuality and were collected by a number of leading French painters, including Gustave Courbet, who kept images by Vallou de Villeneuve in his studio as references for his work, and I think you can see the correlation. By the time that the Paris photographer Eugène Atget took up the camera in the late 1880s, he joined the then substantial ranks of the city's commercial image makers. Atget specialized in views of old Paris, creating a body of work that extensively recorded the city, its architecture, and its architectural decoration, including the photograph that you see at right of a gargoyle at the Louvre. His buyers included architects, decorators, woodworkers, stone carvers, and metalworkers, as well as institutions started to take an interest, including the Bibliothèque Nationale, the Musée Carnavalet, and the École des Beaux-Arts. In the early 20th century, the German Karl Blossfeldt, who initially trained as a caster of iron, started photographing botanical specimens, and you can see one of a poppy at the left, when his professor of art and design asked him to make visual records of plants as reference material. When Blossfeldt became a teacher himself, he expanded on this project, making images for his classes. In time, his work gained popular recognition as well for his images' compelling precision of detail and functionality. His first monograph, which was called Urformen der Kunst, came out in 1928, and the second volume, Wundergarten der Natur, came out in 1932. By the turn of the century, the photographic process had become increasingly simplified and allowed people of all ranks of society to take up the camera. As a result, it became common for painters to make their own photographic aids rather than buying them from firms. For example, around 1897, the painter and photographer Thomas Eakins You see his work at the right. Made several portraits, like this one, of Jeannie Dean Kershaw, wife of the Philadelphia sculptor Samuel Murray, and these inspired several of his oils. And the American artist Charles Sheeler, of whose work the MFA possesses a renowned collection, regularly used his camera to produce photographs as source material for his paintings and drawings. His 1920 film still close-up, which you see at the upper left, of his future wife, Catherine, led to a sensitive pencil drawing that shows Sheeler's penchant for abstraction. He traced the outlines of the figure under his darkroom enlarger, and then drew in the details in delicate strokes of graphite. In 1933, the German photographer Wilhelm Rademann memorialized Kurt Schwitter's iconic sculptural collage, The Märzbau, with his camera. You can see an image on the right. This 8-room construction filled Schwitter's Hanover apartment, representing Dadaist concepts of irrationalism. Schwitters had to abandon the apartment when the Nazis rose to power, and in 1943 the building succumbed to Allied bombings. Rademann's photographs are the documentation preserving the work's intricate construction. Photographs were useful in business contexts as well. The Swiss graphic designer and photographer Herbert Matter, on the left, who came to the US in 1936, became the head graphic designer of the New York furniture firm Knoll Associates in 1944. The company's small size allowed Matter the freedom to become involved in all elements of its visual identity, including marketing. The designer always featured an unexpected element in his eye-catching promotional photographs. His multiple exposure of a Harry Bertoia chair seat at left, set high on a sheet against a white background, makes it look as though the chair seat might be spinning through space. Over the course of the 20th century, publications increasingly became a major outlet for photographs. This was especially true in post-war Japan, where few collectors of photographic prints existed. The artist Kawada Kikuji's series of photographs conveying the horror of the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima was not issued as prints, but as a photo book called Chizu, in English, the map. You can see the cover and slipcase of this book at the right. It was published, and an image from it on the left. It was published on the exact date of the explosion's 20th anniversary in 1965, 20 years later. Kawada's view of the Japanese flag at left, trampled in mud, suggests the bombing's cultural and psychological impact on his nation's people. Many contemporary photographers create, reframe, or subvert conventional expectations, using the medium to comment on aspects of our culture in witty and irreverent ways. American photographer Andy Friedberg made a series of tongue-in-cheek depictions of Russian museum guards who, assigned to watch over the same galleries day after day, had come to adopt attitudes resembling the art they monitored. Friedberg's humorous approach critiques the art historical canon and, in turn, the custom of photographers collaborating with and upholding the traditions of the broader art world. Next section, documenting scientific discovery. Not only have artists and designers used photography since the medium's inception, but also scientists. The medium was almost immediately adopted as the tool of choice to document and thereby validate scientific discoveries. The botanist Anna Atkins, whose work you see on the right, was the first person to produce a book illustrated with original photographic prints. Her publication was dedicated to advancing the scientific understanding of algae. She laid the plants on photosensitized paper, producing the images as what we call cyanotypes, very similar to what architects used to use as blueprints. The process was invented by Atkins's family friend, the scientist Sir John Herschel, and it produces a beautiful shade of blue. Atkins saw this cyanotype process as the ideal means to record her plant specimens because the basic simplicity of it, you would sensitize the paper and put the plant on it in sunlight, and an image would, in time, appear, allowed her to capture a range of specimens quickly and accurately. Her first book, Photographs of British Algae, Cyanotype Impressions, was issued in 3 sections between 1843 and 53, and her second book, Cyanotypes of British and Foreign Ferns, was published 1 year later in 1854. This plate at the right was from this second volume, and it depicts a thistle. And Atkins has carefully spread the leaves across the page to show their prickly roughness. Scientific photographs advanced human understanding of life on Earth from the minuscule to the universal, including aspects of the world impossible to see with the unassisted human eye. A few years after Atkins, the Austrian entomologist Ernst Heger used the camera to record specimens of the insect world via a microscope. You can see an example in the middle. He was able to capture microphotographs of details of his specimens, which he then enhanced, no, it's on the left, sorry, his is on the left, but by means of delicate hand coloring. This can be seen in his meticulous illustration of the wing scales of a red underwing moth. And this reminds me, maybe some of you saw the New York Times, I saw it online last night, which has a wonderful article about new software that's been developed to map the adult fruit fly brain and how sensory signals flow through the 140,000 neurons in the brain. It's a moving video. It's amazing, and it's really beautiful. That's what you can do today. The publication of photographic images soon became central to medical advancements. And when the Boston neurologist John Dean, his is the work in the middle, wanted to have his anatomical cross-sections published, he arranged for the photographs that he had made to be transferred into photolithographs by the Boston printer Ludovic H. Bradford, who was a pioneer of the lithographic process in our country. Dean's 1864 book, titled The Gray Substance of the Medulla Oblongata and Trapezium, includes 4 sections of a sheep's spinal cord where it attaches to the brain. The precise microscopic detail of these images enabled neuroscientists to study the central nervous system like never before. Photographs, such as these by Anna Atkins, Ernst Heger, and John Dean, celebrate the biodiversity that these scientists observed in nature. As photography was used in the pursuit of medicine, so too was it adopted for more fantastical, semi-scientific pursuits. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, spiritualists capitalized on photography's implication of truth. In doing so, they proved that the medium was, in fact, very much capable of illusion. The Russian scientist, whose work you see on the left, Yakub Antonovich von Narkievich Jodko, made a series of photographs that he promoted as depicting the essence of human vitality. He wanted to capture the spirit, the human spirit, on film. To do so, he ran electric currents from one hand of a sitter to another and rested one hand on a photographic plate. So it wasn't really the human spirit he was photographing. While Narkovitz-Jodko's images may have been made in good faith, or somewhat good faith, some members of occult circles made images that were intentionally deceptive, using photographic methods like double exposure to convey shadowy figures, claiming them to be spirits. These pictures were so popular that they were often issued in multiple formats, such as the stereo card, of which you see an example on the right, and which, when slid into a stereo viewer, presented a three-dimensional scene. Images like these were ideal for gullible viewers who knew little about the techniques and methods of photography, and they fueled public imagination. As technologies developed, photographers were often offered front row positions to document their significance. The Russian photojournalist, whose image you see on the right, his name was Ivan Mikhailovich Shagin, recorded the 1933 launch of a stratostat designed by the Soviet Air Force. His depiction of the high-altitude balloon filling with gas in the early morning light captures the enormity of the aircraft. See all the little people at the bottom? Which after liftoff reached a record 16,000 meters, or approximately 53,000 feet. Here in Boston at MIT, Professor Harold Edgerton, known as Doc, developed the stroboscope, for which he obtained a patent in 1949. The new technology's capacity to capture images of phenomena that occurred too rapidly to be seen by the human eye is illustrated in Edgerton's image of a drop of milk falling onto a bright red table. One of Edgerton's most famous images, taken at 1/10,000th of a second, this image of the resulting splash reveals a perfect coronet. The stroboscope's ability to record motion went on to revolutionize science, military surveillance, and movie making. Outer space was another realm that inspired photographers, and long before space travel was possible, scholars used to use the medium to illustrate and aim to prove their theories about the moon and stars. The 19th century English mechanical engineer and inventor James Nasmyth, you see his image on the left, photographed a series of plaster models that he himself had crafted of the moon's surface in order to prove a hypothesis of his own. He published them in his 1874 treatise, The Moon Considered as a Planet, a World, and a Satellite. In it, he argued that the moon's pock-marked topography was the result of volcanic activity. The astonishing degree of verisimilitude that Nasmyth was able to simulate convinced many of his scientific peers, reinforcing the medium's long-running association with objectivity and truth. By the middle of the 20th century, photography had become integral to every aspect of scientific discovery. When the astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in 1969, it was natural that they would bring a camera to document their accomplishment. Making pictures in outer space was no easy feat. The instrument had to be specially modified to work in the extreme environment, and the lens was difficult to focus in zero gravity. The lack of gravity caused further trouble in capturing an image of the US flag, and the team had to stage this picture, wiring the flag so that it would appear to wave. Aldrin and Armstrong attached the camera to one of their spacesuits and pressed the shutter release via a handle, as they were often unable to manage out there in space to look through the viewfinder. 20 of their photographs were selected for Life magazine's commemorative July 20th, 1969 issue, memorializing the U.S.'s historic achievement. By the 70s, many photographers were developing new approaches to image making. Conceptual ideas became more commonplace and often involved poking fun at the cultural contradictions of the time. John Fall, at the left, made a series of manipulated landscapes that cleverly experiment with space and time, such as this one, White Lightning, Dell, Utah, from his Altered Landscape series. And on the right, Robert Cummings' quick shift of the head leaves glowing stool after image posited on pedestal depicts a metal stool next to a false after image of the object, clearly a drawing as indicated by the can of spray paint resting on the top of the canvas nearby. These works riff on ideas of perception and illusion, as well as the authenticity of images of scientific documentation. Scientific methods and processes continue to influence a number of contemporary artists. In the late 90s, Gary Schneider made his Genetic Self-Portrait series, which includes 55 images of his own body, made through a range of photographic processes from the photogram to MRI, X-rays, and microscopy techniques. The artist produced many of these photographs with the assistance of doctors and scientists at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York. One in this series is a two-part representation of his magnified retinas. Schneider's method straddles science and art, and in his revealing of the shadowy macula of its bright optic nerves surrounded by blood vessels, he created a sort of celestial landscape that is both metaphorical and factual, and an exploration of his identity. Schneider's connecting of science and art underscores the enduring ties between the two fields. Fame and fashion. Along with the rise of consumerism in the 19th century, which went hand in hand with the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, and the growth of the middle class, there developed a more globalized popular culture. Much of this culture was enabled by the introduction of photography, as well as advances in printing processes. As the newspaper and magazine industries evolved, so did the relationship between the general public and popular entertainment and fashion. The ability to manufacture and distribute such publications widely meant consumers were able to stay current with the latest trends and the lives of the well-known. Even before the Industrial Revolution, people had long collected paintings, sculptures, coins, and printed portraits of highly esteemed figures. But photography revolutionized the practice. Though the idea of celebrity was not new, the medium dramatically redefined who became famous and how one would be remembered. Not only could photographs represent the appearance of a person with greater accuracy of detail than before, but their reproducibility and low cost allowed a larger number of people to possess portraits of popular figures. One of the earliest photographers of celebrities was the Frenchman Gaspard Félix Tournachon, who adopted the professional pseudonym of Nadar. You see his image on the left. His perceptive portraits of the cultural personalities of his country in the 1850s and 60s include this image of Jean Journet, an eccentric Paris street preacher, beloved in his bohemian circle. Nadar photographed the devout Journet in a manner reminiscent of Spanish Baroque painting. The preacher wears a pilgrim's robe, and he looks heavenward as if receiving spiritual insight. The British portraitist Julia Margaret Cameron imbued her photographs with a similar energy. Her belief in the transformative power of art lent an unusually expressive quality to her work, which she styled with soft focus, close-up perspectives, and painterly chiaroscuro. Cameron's subjects included some of Victorian England's most respected figures, such as the English poet laureate Alfred Lord Tennyson, who was her neighbor and close friend on the Isle of Wight, where she lived. She sold her formal photographs of Tennyson to the public as part of a series of portraits of men of accomplishment, but she also made a few informal likenesses of the poet, like this one at right. One such image captures the familial closeness of Tennyson as a father, with his sons Hallam and Lionel leaning into him affectionately. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, technical advances began to alter the course of the printing industry. The development of the halftone process meant photographic images could be reproduced more easily on a printed page, which led to a decrease in the cost of producing publications, making them more profitable. In 1892, the American entrepreneur Condé Nast founded Vogue magazine, and in 1914, he relaunched Vanity Fair as a magazine focused on society and celebrity. And the newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst revamped the magazine Harper's Bazaar in 1913. Photography became integral to the success of these magazines, and access to popular culture was now available to the public on a massive scale. The rise of the Hollywood movie industry provided inspiring subject matter for many magazines of the time. Photographers such as Edward Steichen idealized film stars with dramatic celebrity shots. Steichen brought an imaginative spirit to his work, creating some of the best-known fashion and celebrity images of his period. One of these, you see on the right, was made for Vanity Fair in 1924, and it depicts the American actress Gloria Swanson. Steichen recalled the sitting in his autobiography, explaining that the session had been difficult with many changes of clothes. At the end, he dangled a piece of black lace in front of the star's face, and as he remembered, I quote, "She recognized the idea at once. Her eyes dilated, and her look was that of a leopardess lurking behind leafy shrubbery, watching her prey." The photograph, taken through the veil of delicate lacework, depicts Swanson as a mysterious and dramatic figure. Through fashion photographs, viewers interested in a clothing style, often promoted by the celebrities of the day, could try it on, and with it, maybe a new look or role. For personal attire and adornment have long been tools used to project one's tastes and aspirations to the outside world. The photograph on the left by the Russian émigré Georges Hoyningen-Huene reveals what a fashion shoot entailed in the early 20th century. You can see the model, Lee Miller, at the center. She was also a very gifted photographer in her own right. And she poses in Vogue's Paris studio, her white dress framed by an Art Deco archway. Around her are the various staff involved. The magazine's celebrated editor, Carmel Snow, is seen adjusting her dress. And several assistants are arranging Huygens-Hune's bulky 8x10 camera and lighting equipment. Nicholas Murray, a Hungarian-born immigrant who arrived in New York in 1913, opened a successful portrait studio in the city in 1920, which specialized in commercial work for magazines such as Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, Vanity Fair, and the New York Times. Murray visited Mexico in 1931, and he met the painter Frida Kahlo, with whom he embarked on a love affair, even though she was married to fellow Mexican artist Diego Rivera. Their complicated relationship lasted for 10 years, and the photographs of Kahlo that Murray made from 1937 to 1948, like the one at left, capture now not only the now iconic painter's individuality and self-styling, but also the deep affection and the sense of collaboration between the photographer and his subject. The Armenian-born Yousuf Karsh, on the right, set up a photo studio in 1930 in Ottawa, and his rise to international success was launched when it was arranged for him to photograph Winston Churchill on the occasion of Churchill's December 1941 World War II address to the Canadian Parliament. When the Prime Minister declined the photographer's request to remove his cigar, Karsh audaciously took it from his mouth, prompting a look of harsh indignation that when the image was printed a few years later on the cover of a 1945 Life magazine issue, epitomized the defiant attitude of his beleaguered British nation. Karsh went on to become world-renowned as a portraitist of famous and influential figures, including royalty and statesmen, as well as artists, writers, actors, musicians, and scientists. Oops, it skipped one. There we go. The new handheld cameras of the 1920s made it possible for photographers to work more effortlessly, capturing movement and action with faster shutter speeds. Magazine editor Carmel Snow, who you saw in that picture of staging up a fashion photograph a minute or so ago, left Vogue in 1932 for Harper's Bazaar, and she was very keen on including images of action in her new magazine. In 1933, she invited the Hungarian immigrant photographer Martin Munkaci, who had recently arrived in New York, to photograph the model Lucille Brokaw on a Long Island beach on a cold November day. Not yet able to speak English, Munkaci motioned for Brokaw to run on the sand. He saw her shivering, and then he snapped the shutter. His image evokes a freedom and zest for life that felt fresh and was exactly what Snow was looking for to enhance her magazine's appeal to modern, independently minded women. As magazines competed with one another, the ability to create photographs that exemplified spontaneity and spiritedness rapidly became essential to an artist's success. Snow and her Harper's Bazaar art director, who was Alexei Brodovich, another Russian immigrant, encouraged staff photographers to produce dynamic images. Brodovich would say, "Astonish me," to his photographers. Richard Avedon, who joined the magazine staff in 1946, responded with remarkable inventiveness. Just a year later, Snow and Brodovich sent him to cover the Paris fashion collections. He was very young, just starting out. Avedon had grown up in the New York garment business. His father owned a clothing store, and his mother's family was in dress manufacturing. And his parents planned the family's annual holiday portraits meticulously and ambitiously. They staged them in front of wealthy people's homes, sitting themselves in other people's cars, and posing with borrowed dogs. Just imagine. As a result, Avedon understood in a deep way the power of appearances and how one's clothing and setting could communicate a certain image. His photograph of the American model Susie Parker in a Christian Dior evening gown at the left, taken in a rented Paris studio, conveys his ability to capture the energy of a moment. The informality of the setting, which in Avedon's print reveals the background, setup, and studio staging, is juxtaposed against the refined elegance of Parker's dress. And I think I'll just add here that when this photograph was reproduced in the magazine, they cropped it to just show her and the black background. But he then later printed it in this full way and sold prints of it. It's interesting to note. Paris, along with the city's fashion industry, had been struggling to recover after World War II. But the images that Avedon returned to Harper's Bazaar that year had such vitality and appeal that the photographer is frequently credited now for having helped reestablish the French capital as the center of the fashion world. The Los Angeles photographer Herb Ritz trained his camera on the human form, capturing the beautifully toned bodies of supermodels, as well as the manner in which some celebrities were willing to be outrageous in many of his photographs for the industry. His images, characterized by their strong graphic qualities, appeared not only in magazines, but also on merchandise, t-shirts and stuff. His portrait at right of the supermodels, Stephanie Seymour, Cindy Crawford, Christy Turlington, Tatiana Patitz, and Naomi Campbell, was initially made for Rolling Stone magazine. It depicts their toned bodies and long-limbed elegance on full display. I've been told by people close to Herb Ritz that they were wearing bathing suits, which he then changed in the computer to make them appear as if they were nude. Ritz liked to print this famous image at the ambitiously large scale of 40 to 45 inches. The print we have is huge, further magnifying the women's beauty and allure. Helmut Newton's provocative approach to fashion image making pushed further boundaries. Newton shot on assignment for Vogue, Elle, Queen, and Playboy magazines, and his images combine luxurious sophistication with racy voyeurism. His 1994 X-ray of a foot in a high-heeled boot illustrates the torturous lengths to which many people are willing to go to be fashionable. This photographer's radical approach routinely challenged what a fashion photograph could be. In recent decades, photographers have used many of the trappings of celebrity and fashion to make works that comment on fame and popular culture. The Japanese-born artist Kuniei Sugiura, who resides in New York, has long resided in New York, applied the photogram process to make unique, life-size silhouettes of her artist friends in the years around 2000. When photographing Takashi Murakami, holding two-dimensional cutouts for a sculpture that he had recently installed in Rockefeller Center, Sugiura echoed the rounded forms common in Murakami's work through the shapes of the famous artist's stomach, head, and eyeglasses. See all those curved shapes. The artist's pose suggests immediacy, as if he were in the midst of mapping out a composition. She immortalizes him in the act of creation. The contemporary Brooklyn-based artist, young Brooklyn-based artist, who went to RISD, graduated only a few years ago, Martine Gutierrez, also plays with representation, incorporating fresh ideas about fashion in her practice. Gutierrez, who grew up in a multicultural family and identifies as a non-binary trans woman, uses herself as the model, exploring imagined personas that touch on issues of race, class, and gender. She proclaimed, "Let me make a magazine that I would want to be in," because she couldn't imagine herself in a fashion magazine that she would see on the racks in a store. And so she did just that. In 2018, she created a 124-page magazine-like photo book titled Indigenous Woman, of which you see the cover on the left and a plate from it on the right. And the plate some of the plates she issues as photographic prints. We own both the magazine and a print. In this project, she undertook every aspect. She was the model, she was the stylist, she was the makeup artist, she was the set designer, she was the graphic artist, she was the editor. She wrote editorials for the magazine. She was did fake advertisements, and she was the publisher. The faux magazine's glossy spreads include portraits of her in which she appears styled as various indigenous deities wearing traditional clothing in mock high fashion spreads, such as this image on the right. And it advertises retro and contemporary items from made-up brands. Those are the advertisements she crafted for the magazine. Andy Warhol famously stated, "In the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. While early photographers would have likely found that difficult to fathom, camera images have made increasingly fleeting concepts of fame possible. Photography promotes the now worldwide trends in what people wear, as well as in what they aspire to do and to be." Once, museums rarely added the kinds of pictures that I have discussed today to their collections, dismissing them as too slight or commercial. In recent decades, however, this attitude has changed, and photographs that were not always considered fine art now grace our walls. Our modern culture is inextricably linked to image making, a connection that will only continue to strengthen, and museum photography collections will likely change as new narratives of photography and popular culture emerge. Thank you. I thought my lecture was going to go all the way to the hour and a half, and it's gone only to the hour. I'm more than happy to answer questions. You're welcome to take a look at my copy of the book. We have a wonderful photography collection. It numbers about 18,000 photographs. The reason I say about is that we have, in addition to photographs, we have portfolios of photographs. And do you count that as one, or do you count it as, say, 20? We also have photo books, because we're increasingly realizing that photo books were often the ultimate project of or goal of the photographer. So that's important. That's part of the story for us. And we exhibit them in the Herb Ritz Gallery, which you might see. There's a Barbara Bosworth show in there right now that my colleague Karen Haas organized. And also we have a very nice display of some of our large-scale contemporary works in the lower rotunda. And that's the first of 3 displays that we're going to have of those types of works in the lower rotunda. So please come and look. And any questions? Yes?
Do you know what kind of camera that Martine used? Did she use the models, or did she do the iPhone clicker?
I don't know if she uses an I know, I'm sure it's a handheld camera, but I don't know if it's an iPhone. I suspect not. I don't know, would you get that resolution with an iPhone, like on the right? The print on the right is about this big.
I'm just kind of imagining if she didn't have a photographer.
Yeah.
She was taking it herself.
Yeah,
what kind of
how she set it up.
How she set it up.
Yeah. You know, there's lots of information about her online, and there's video clips of her talking about her work. I would recommend looking at that. You might learn more about her. I think her work is amazing. I think the idea that she made this magazine feels very fresh and new. So
Incredible.
it's really incredible. And she's exploring all kinds of forms of identity in it, so it's pretty wonderful. Anybody else? Great. Thank you for coming.